Hi everybody, I'm Kris Hicks, Head of Press and Communications at UKIP. Welcome to the UKIP official YouTube channel. We're just starting a new series of interviews and discussions about various topics in the news. I'm joined by Carl Benjamin, fellow UKIP member and YouTube personality and thinker. How are you, Carl?
I'm very well, thank you. Surprisingly warm actually today. So
yes, indeed.
Better weather than I was expecting. But yeah, I'm very well, thank you.
That's great, fantastic. Well, I thought we'd start on really what happened last night, certainly in terms of Parliament. They voted down what is effectively Theresa May's strategy on approaching Brexit. I mean, I must say the first thing I was surprised with, that she actually has a strategy, so I'm not sure what she was voting on really. This was a non-binding vote, so it basically sent effectively a message that, look, we're still not with you, we don't support your withdrawal agreement. Stop trying to do what you're attempting to do. What was also interesting is that, of course, the press led on the defeat of Mrs May, but also in the night Mr Corbyn was defeated on his motion, which would effectively potentially have taken no deal off the table, although that was also non-binding, and also the SNP, which is effectively, like the Liberal Democrats, committed to stopping Brexit. They were looking to delay Brexit Day for approximately 3 months. So they're all defeated. Nothing's really changed, has it?
Well, I mean, honestly, I'm actually relying on you more than anyone here to almost talk me through the intricacies of it. Because I'm not inside the Westminster bubble, so I'm always looking at it from the outside. Well,
to be honest, neither am I, as someone from UKIP. But what I would say is that, look, we haven't made any progress whatsoever in that regard. Brexit, thankfully, is still on course for March the 29th. Yeah. As much as the political establishment wants to kind of stop this all from happening, they've still kind of cancelled each other out. Right now, it's almost like it's like a boxing fight right now. It's like you've got two fighters. They're punching everything out of each other, but the clock is ticking and they're drawing on points. Yeah. What we want, of course, in UKIP is for that clock to count down to 11 p.m. on March the 29th. We will leave on the so-called no-deal Brexit. Of course, we call it the WTO Brexit. Yeah. The Brexit that 17.4 million people, I would argue, all voted for, which is, of course, to return Britain to being an independent sovereign nation state that controls its own borders, controls its own laws, and really returns to being a normal country again. Because by the way, most countries on the planet aren't in the European Union or a similar kind of federal super state.
It's amazing how the rest of the world manages to get by, isn't it? But this whole thing is pretty wild to me, because all it seems like as an outsider looking in is there's absolute chaos in the political class. And almost all of the roles have been completely reversed. I mean, like Jeremy Corbyn's getting castigated by his own party for not being firm on the second referendum. And then all of these videos of him from only a few years back, honestly, stridently destroying the EU in moral principle in ways that I'm actually genuinely envious of. And I'm sat there applauding, going, go Jeremy, you tell them about the evil of this European empire, It's like he obviously should be leading the Brexiteer charge from his side, but he can't because his party hates the idea for some reason. Well, the Conservatives, I hear the Conservatives are, the majority of the actual party base are very pro-Brexit, but many of the MPs are Remain, and they seem to be the ones with the reins of power at the moment. So I don't think anyone's got the inclination to get the job done correctly. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, absolutely. And what's interesting about Corbyn is he is effectively an old Labourite, and by that I mean somebody pre-Tony Blair.
Yeah, he's a Bennite.
Yeah, absolutely. So and people like Tony Benn, people like Peter Shaw. Back in the 1970s, it was actually the Labour Party, not the Conservative Party, that led the charge on criticising the European community, and really trying to get us out of that.
It was the Tories that put us in, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we went in with that, and it's really been successive Tory governments that's actually brought us in further and further. Of course, the Maastricht Treaty, 1992, it led to the downfall, of course, of Margaret Thatcher. They have really pushed that, and what is really interesting here, like you say, it's difficult for Corbyn at the same time because he has that kind of Blairite faction within his party, people like Chuka Umunna and others, who are totally opposed to Brexit. They don't want it to happen, quite simply. At the same time, there's the other complexities. There are Remainer MPs with the Labour Party who sits on northern seats, and some of those seats in the north voted for Brexit by 70% plus. So they're very concerned that the people in their communities are not going to vote for them next time if the Labour Party is seen as stifling Brexit. I think really what we're seeing...
I think that's a massive threat.
Absolutely.
I don't think that can be understated, just how unsafe those seats are. And for Remainer Conservatives in Brexiteer areas, obviously. I mean, the people in the north... People in the south don't tend to talk about it much. They seem to be quite sick of it. But when we went to Bolton the other day, okay, I was at a UKIP meeting, but these people were very concerned about it. And I've seen various documentaries on Sky and things like this, where they're just interviewing like people in chip shops. And the people in the chip shops are saying, well, it's looking bad, we want our Brexit, we voted for this, and now principally you have to do it. One of the things I hate, and I hate this, it's such a self-serving Westminster line. It's like, nobody voted to be poorer. It's like, okay, but that wasn't the vote. But, you can say that. But we know that an inevitable consequence of a no-deal Brexit, leaving the EU, no questions asked, is going to be that the country does get marginally poorer by whatever degree, then you can't say they didn't vote for that, because people were well aware that there would be an upheaval. People were aware that there would be some kind of economic disturbance, and that, there are going to be some jobs lost, but hopefully, if we play our cards right, there are going to be many more jobs made, and things will get better after an interruption. It's just such a way of trying to just shut down any conversation on the idea of actually leaving, even if it's painful. I'm just like, and then you see them trying to lay claim to the Dunkirk spirit. It's like, you've got the spirit of Vichy France.
Yeah, very well put. What we are effectively seeing is establishment political parties fighting over their preferred means of stopping or impeding Brexit. Yeah. They want to do it in a way which most supports their own party, effectively. They've got the element that they don't want to look like they're stopping Brexit for a number of their voters, but at the same time, they need to kind of get this done in terms of achieving power. And this is the other side of things as well, is that you've also got this ERG group in the Conservative Party, these kind of committed Brexiteers. They're happy for that, but they're far too small to truly influence that vote on the same time. So it really is almost like an internal Game of Thrones going on within Parliament itself at present. Nobody can really, as I said earlier, kind of land the final punch to stifle Brexit. So from the perspective of somebody who believes in real Brexit, a UKIP Brexit, let's say, I'm somewhat happy at present, but I am very cautious. And knowing the political establishment, I think they will really drop to anything to try and stop this.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. I at this point, just the way the European Union is, and the attitude they're taking towards Britain, I'm fully on board with honestly just saying, well, to hell with you. I just want out now. I don't want their ability to do anything to our country to continue after March 29th. I just want to honestly shove it in their faces now, because I'm absolutely sick of being told that there's a special layer in hell for people who don't want to be ruled by Europe. And the flip side of the coin is that things aren't going well in Europe. Now I saw an article on The Guardian that was written by our good friend George Soros.
I see.
And I'll read a few quotes, because these are just, what I love about this is he's saying everything that I've been saying for quite some time now, because like whenever I look at the European Union and I just look at the dynamics of the forces that are inside the political superstructure and how they're moving, it looks drastically unstable. The whole thing looks like it is a house of cards, that it is like they're clearly, very, very clearly accelerating the process of European integration. A couple of weeks ago they were talking about how to levy taxes and blocking national vetoes, blocking new taxes. Obviously the European Army project is, despite all of the denials by our political class and theirs, is now on the table and is still going forward. And these are the final two pieces that make up a state. You've got a sovereign, you've got ability to raise taxes, and you've got borders, the Schengen area borders that you have now the ability to defend with an army. That's the essential components of a state. And so that's the European Union finalising itself as a federal sovereign entity. And they're not shy about saying this. Merkel has said, we're going to have to give up more sovereignty. Juncker and all the rest all say, that's a great idea. We think everyone should give up their sovereignty. And so I'm very, very glad to be getting out of it. But the way that this has been done, and especially the sort of accelerationism of the EU at this point, the pro-EU leaders around Europe and the bureaucracy, I think it's built on incredibly shaky foundations. And this is actually what George Soros was saying in The Guardian. Like I said, I'll give you some quotes. Europe is sleepwalking into oblivion, and its people need to wake up before it's too late. If they don't, the European Union will go the way of the Soviet Union in 1991. Neither our leaders nor our ordinary citizens seem to understand that we are experiencing a revolutionary moment, and that the range of possibilities is very broad, and the eventual outcome thus highly uncertain. What do you reckon?
Well, it's very interesting. He compares it to the Soviet Union in 1991. It's almost said with a set of disappointment. Well, was he also disappointed that the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991?
I'd have to ask him, I'm afraid.
Well, I think you should. It's all very interesting, isn't it, with the European army? I mean, we remember, of course, Nick Clegg talking about how talk of this, it's a dangerous fantasy.
And Miliband just laughed in Farage's face.
Yes, absolutely.
Like publicly, as if Farage was saying that the moon was made of cheese or something. And it was just like, no, they obviously want this. But sorry.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, it's they were talking about how it's a fantasy, and it's gone from, oh no, that's a load of rubbish, to, well, what's wrong with the European army? And there's been this sharp takeover. Well, I can tell you what's wrong, firstly, with the European army for a number of reasons. A major reason, and this is something I've brought up with the left, who tend to be for nuclear disarmament.
Yes.
Britain and France have nuclear weapons. Are they saying then they would like to create a new super-state with a military that is nuclear armed?
Capable, yeah.
I mean, is this something we really want to add to the world at this point? And, you're talking about developing a super-state with an army that's basically bumping up against Russia, which has, of course, the largest nuclear stockpile on the planet.
And then they are not shy to bring up the Russian boogeyman. I mean, like, Russia's population is actually in decline. I don't think Russia is going to engage in some kind of full-scale mobilization or land war. I think that when I mean, this is like old military doctrine, basically. Like, that goes back to, forever. If families aren't having an excess number of children, they become a lot more protective of their children. They don't want to send their kids off to war. Patriotism becomes less important. And then you've got just the question of what's Russia's military actually like in comparison to NATO's military. And then, like, why do we even need the European Union at all if we have NATO? And, I mean, do we think that America isn't going to honour its NATO commitments? Possibly, but...
Well, I've always believed in mutually assured destruction. I think it actually works. There's been this idea that, thanks to the EU, that's the reason we haven't had another war in Europe. No, it's the fact that we have NATO and we have mass nuclear arms. If there was a third world war, it would destroy the planet. And people are rational about that, and they're quite aware that it would achieve nothing other than destruction.
It's simple game theory.
Yeah.
You don't do something if it's going to lead to your own destruction, and the other person will also follow that line of logic. So that's how, that's how we survived the Cold War, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, people talk about kind of the invasion of the Ukraine and things like that. I mean, the biggest mistake the Ukraine made was in 1994. They gave up their nuclear weapons. The Ukraine had 1/3 of the entire Soviet nuclear arsenal based in the Ukraine, And in the Accords which came after, they gave it up. They said, no, we're going to be a non-nuclear state. I would wager that if they had maintained their nuclear deterrent, you probably wouldn't see Russian troops in the Donbass. You wouldn't have seen the invasion of the Crimea by Russia, because they would be
Ukraine being chipped away by Russia.
Absolutely, it most likely would not have happened. And it's not happening to the Baltic states because, of course, they're in NATO and therefore they have the kind of the nuclear protection. So I think that proves it. It's a very difficult situation. I mean, you can kind of see it from the Russian side of things as well. I mean, in the 90s, Russia was a joke. It was led by a clown. Boris Yeltsin was a clown. And now he's been replaced by, obviously, somebody in form of Mr. Putin as somebody who is very authoritarian. And whether or not you liked Mr. Putin, people are afraid of Russia. People, if the world doesn't respect Russia, at least they fear them. So.
I think that the important thing to know about Putin is that he's a very astute statesman. He's very smart, and he has managed to advance Russian interests in the face of not only like American and European provocation, but like outright attempts to sabotage his allies. I mean, look at Syria. I think it was 2012, 2013, where they said, right, Obama said, right, we've got the red line. If this goes further, and suddenly there's a mysterious chemical attack somewhere in Syria, which is very convenient. And in a press conference, a journalist just asked John Kerry, well, what can Syria even do to prevent regime change at this point? And he just blurted out, well, hand over all their chemical weapons. And Vladimir Putin, I think it was the same deal. The next day was like, done. We'll take that deal. Thank you, because Syria is apart from Iran, the last Russian ally in the Middle East and their only Mediterranean port. So Russia had to desperately prevent regime change there. And on the sort of geopolitical chessboard, these are very small victories that Russia is gaining. Syria is not an oil-rich country. Scotland has more oil than Syria. There's nothing there of any particular value except from the location that it is in the Mediterranean and connected to the Middle East for Russia, and that's the only particular reason that we want to knock them off and replace them with some kind of pro-Western ally. And
sorry, on that point,
yeah.
The idea of Syria as a pro-Western ally, Syria was.
Well,
they were
not anti-Western.
No, but they were the stars. I mean, Assad, before he became the president, he didn't think he was going to become president because his elder brother actually passed away. He was the chosen one, so to speak.
And but he trained as an ophthalmologist.
He worked in London. He lived in London. Yeah. His wife is a British Syrian, Asma al-Assad. Yeah. She's now been stripped of her citizenship. But, Assad and his wife, they were in Vogue magazine and various other things. They were big, massive stars. But as soon as, of course, they started moving towards the other sphere, then it all came crashing down, of course. It's a very difficult situation out there, of course. But I mean, going back to the European army question, NATO's there to keep the peace. Everyone knows, however, that the EU is expansionist.
Yes,
that is the logic behind it. If you develop a military structure that is based on the idea that effectively Europe has no borders, the European Union hasn't really defined Europe. No. But that as well, because I mean they've been talking about, of course, including Turkey, various other nations. They even talk about even including a place like Israel into the European Union at some point. So when you have what is becoming a super state and a new superpower, and it doesn't even identify what its frontiers are. Yeah. It leaves that as a blank statement. Yeah. That is very concerning indeed.
And I'm really glad you brought that up, because that ties in very well with something George Soros was saying. In fact, the way that he finished it, because what he was very definitely talking about, he's not talking about Europe as a geographic entity, as a geographic sort of set boundary political entity. He is talking about a set of ideals, and he does actively say that. In fact. He says, I mean, in the article he's complaining about democracy and the fact that our party democracies, which he describes as antiquated, hampers those who want to preserve the values on which the EU was founded, but it helps those who want to replace those values with something radically different, as in people who want to vote for a pro-national party or people who want to vote for a pro-European party. It's the system of values that he's talking about, and that's what he thinks of when he's referring to the European Union. And he says this all the way through the article, and he finishes it with, this is amazing. The first step to defending Europe from its enemies, both internal and external, is to recognise the magnitude of the threat they present. The second is to awaken the sleeping pro-European majority and mobilise it to defend the values on which the European Union was founded. Otherwise, the dream of a united Europe could become a 21st century nightmare. I mean, that's explicit. That's not about the sovereignty of the people. It's about the expression of the values. And obviously that means you've got internal enemies within Europe who don't agree with the globalist European vision. Obviously, they are an internal enemy to Europe, but is that really how you should be describing the democratic vote of European citizens?
Well,
enemies of Europe.
Absolutely. It's very inconvenient, isn't it? That these people aren't going away with their little democracies and all that. No, and this whole dream of a united Europe. I mean, if you go out there, the majority of European peoples, they don't want a European superstate. They're very happy in terms of their existing borders and the history of their nations. That is something. I mean, what we've seen in terms of an attempt is really the creation of a European or EU culture.
The sort of like the international, the sort of capital city culture, the sort of cosmopolitan capital city culture, that's true, and that happens in America and in other places across the world as well, where you've just got people who regularly move between these giant cities, but never spend any time in the hinterlands, where the sort of what we would describe in other countries as the national culture is being expressed.
Cool.
You know, if you were to go to, I don't know, wherever, you know, Syria or Argentina or something like that, and you go into the countryside and you see how regular people living there live, you would say, right, okay, that's their national culture and it's not our job to interfere with that. But that's the complete opposite attitude that the EU have.
Yes, absolutely. And there is increasingly a yawning chasm between these kind of metropolitan elites and the people out there. And this goes back then against to, you know, the people who are meeting in the north of England. These are communities that have been ravaged. They've had industries, entire industries completely destroyed. Since
well, the fishing industry is a perfect example. We are an island. Is it not desperately irresponsible to allow a foreign entity to ravage the coastal towns and industries of an island nation?
Of course,
it's madness.
And you know, all the propaganda, the pro-EU propaganda, they've been using a kind of a bait and switch tactic. They're saying, oh, well, look, we've given Objective 1 funding to this region. They've lost their industry, but look, here's a community centre funded by the EU. Here's this, here's that. You know, all useless buildings in many cases, and actually paid for with our own money anyway, because we're a net contributor.
Well, the EU as of yet doesn't raise its own taxes, and even when it does, that'll still be your money that you're paying.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back as well, sorry, the idea of net contributors. I understand there's only about 9 of the 27 EU countries who are actually net contributors. The rest are dependent on
two are leaving. Ireland, I saw in I can't remember what Irish newspaper it was, but they thought the Ireland would flip from being a net contributor to a net receiver because of the damage that a no-deal Brexit will do to their economy. And obviously we're leaving and we're the second biggest net contributor. So that's 2 they're knocking off that list. And that's just an increased financial burden on the Dutch, German and Italian taxpayers effectively. And I'm sure they're going to be thrilled with that.